Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I thought we could talk about the 9 books that I managed to read in the month of February. Now 9 books is really good for me. I'm kind of averaging about 8 or 9 a month. Some months I can read a lot more, some months I can read a lot less. I think I didn't read as much as what I normally do this month just because of one of the books was like 800 pages long and it took me like 2 weeks to read. So I definitely think I would have read more if I hadn't read that, but it was a big release and you'll probably know the book I'm talking about, but let's just dive right into it. So the first book I read and finished in February was The Cloisters. I did this for a read along with Tandem Collective. So we end up following Anne, who has just moved to New York City and she wants to work for the Museum of Art and she's hoping to get a job there. But when she arrives, she is basically given a job at the Cloisters, which is a Gothic sort of museum which is kind of known for Renaissance art. Now she is quickly absorbed into the character, into the people that she is working with, and is I suppose very easily influenced with her choices and has a real kind of desire and eagerness to kind of please everyone, especially Patrick, who is kind of her boss, who she also kind of has a thing for. It's basically centered around tarot cards and she kind of figures out that she can read them really well, and it's just, I suppose when they hired her they must have sensed that about her. But she manages to find this really old tarot deck and it all starts from there. She is then basically the centre of attention. She is part of this toxic sort of friend group and she doesn't know who to trust, she doesn't know who to turn to. It was a really thrilling read. I read this because it was the Waterstones thriller book of the month and I did really enjoy it. There were times that it was quite slow, and I think because it was quite historical, I'm not the biggest historical fan, so some things kind of went over my head a little bit, but it was a really fun time. The book is absolutely stunning, so I'm glad to have this as part of my collection. But it's kind of centered at like dark academia sort of, which I kind of get but kind of not. And again, it's kind of thriller but it's kind of not, sort of. It's kind of one of those you don't really know what kind of section to kind of put it in because it is fiction, but people kind of say it's similar to like The Secret History, which in turn I can see, but then in turns I can't really see that either, so it's kind of hard to place, but I did have a fun time reading this and I am glad that I read it. So the next book I picked up was an audiobook and I listened to The Golden Mole by Catherine Rundell. So this is basically a collection of stories all about animals, and she basically kind of talks about why these animals are just so amazing and how different they are and what they provide to the earth. I mean, most animals are slowly getting extinct, you know, that's just the way that we are going in the world, which is just horrible to think, but the impact that these animals have is such an incredible story. I did pick up the illustrated edition at work. This was like the only copy that we had since it's gone into paperback, but it comes with these gorgeous like golded edges and then it is also illustrated inside, so each kind of animal has their own like illustration, and it's such a beautiful sort of book. It's definitely like a gift book. I think it's one that you want to kind of treasure, but I mean the pictures are just stunning and the story was incredible, and I'm pretty sure when I listened to it, I'm sure it was narrated by Lenny Henry as well, which, you know, he's a well-known person, and so it was fun to kind of listen to him tell the story. But I definitely do think we take for granted the animals in the world and what they do to help provide like the necessities for us, and I just think Catherine Rundell is just a great author as it is. She's done so many kids books, she's done non-fiction books, like she's such a vast range sort of author, and I definitely had just a really fun time just listening to this and kind of just getting that sort of knowledge about it. I did kind of sit and like listen to it all in one day, and I think I kind of made a mistake with that. I definitely think I should have just picked this up as and when throughout like the month or something, because as you can see from like the contents, there is stories on like so many different animals, so I've definitely forgotten some of them, which is horrible to say, but I do definitely want to go back and give this a bit of a reread. But it was just a fun, very informative sort of read, which is not normally one that I would tend to gravitate to. I don't tend to really pick up non-fiction as much, but I am very glad that I did pick up this. Now the next book I picked up was a book that my friend recommended to me. She gave me the whole series and it was one of her favourite fantasy like middle grade sort of series that she's read, and she just thought that I would probably enjoy it, so she's lent it to me, and this is Alana, the First Adventure. So I've only managed to read the first book. I haven't got around to the other 3. I do intend to read it at some point soon. I just keep getting carried away with other books. So Cairo, when you see this, I'm so sorry, but I will get to it as soon as I can. But in this book we are following Alana. Now she wants to be a knight but she can't be a knight because she is a girl. She's just supposed to be a princess and marry into a wealthy family, you know, the normal sort of thing that they expect women to do in stories. So Alana is going by the name Alan in the story because she is basically pretending to be a guy so she can train up to be a knight. So she basically manages to find a way to trade places with her twin brother so she can be the knight and train up to be a warrior. Now it is a struggle for her. She has to master weapons, she needs to master combat, she needs to master magic. Like, she has so much to go through and it takes its toll on her a little bit, and she does find it stressful, but it is definitely worth it in the end for her. She has that push, that drive, because this is what she wants. And I do definitely think it is such an amazing story for younger readers to get out of the stereotypical a girl needs to do this and a boy needs to do that. In the world that we live in now, things aren't like that anymore, and I think it's good that people are telling stories like that. But then this is such an old book as well. It's not anything new. Now this particular edition was published in 2014, so it is 10 years old, and we were already telling stories like this. And I just think that's incredible, because young girls and young boys are going to be reading this and knowing that they can be anything that they want to be. So I think this is just a beautiful message for children to know that if you want to do something, you just go and do it. No one's going to stop you. You are free to kind of live your life exactly how you want it. So I can't wait to pick up the rest of the series. Like I said, I do just need to get my arse in gear and pick them up. So Cairo, that's down to you. You need to just push me to read it, but I did have a very fun time reading this. Now the next book, which took me most of the month to read, and that's probably not surprising to anyone, and that is House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J Maas. This is the third book in the Crescent City series, so I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm not going to tell you anything about this because it is the third book in a series, but just know that I had a great time reading this. I was definitely trying to savor reading it, which I think is why it took me so long, but then I also wanted to speed through it because I was really enjoying it, so I was a bit at a crossroads. I did have a great time reading this though. Now I don't think this is my favourite book of the series. I think the ending of the second book is still in my head, and I don't think there was as much crossover as I wanted there to be. Obviously if you know the ending of the second book, you know what the last line is, and I just gathered that was going to be like most of the book, but I think we ended up seeing them 2 or 3 times, which, you know, for like a couple scenes, if that, so it wasn't as much as I thought. And there were certain characters that weren't in it as well, which I thought were going to be, so I was a little disappointed in that. But the storyline was great. There has to be another book, I keep saying this. There is 4 houses, so we are expecting a House of Many Waters book some point in the near future, hopefully. If she doesn't, I'm going to be very cross, because why create 4 houses if you're not going to write 4 books? But I am planning a reread of ACOTAR this year, and I do kind of want to reread Crescent City because I want to fully sit and annotate them as well, because I bet there are so many things that have happened that have crossed over that I just kind of don't realise. So if I can get to ACOTAR this year, I do want to try and give Crescent City a reread, and that includes House of Earth and Blood, Sky and Breath, and Flame and Shadow. But I love Sarah J Maas's books. She does no wrong. I just love her writing style. I love the characters. I love the plot. I just love everything about her. So this was a 5-star read. Even though it was disappointing and I know there was missing some bits, I still had a fun time. So it just took me so long to get to, so I'm surprised I managed to read as much as I did. Now the next book I picked up was These Violent Delights by Micah Neveremmer. So I picked this up as an audiobook and was just listening to this as and when while I was in the car on the way to work or something like that. And this is a debut novel. I don't know if he has wrote anything else. I haven't seen anything else around, but this is a debut novel and it is just amazing. So this is very much dark academia vibes. It is set at Pittsburgh University, and the main protagonist, Paul, his father has just died, so he's going to university in the hopes of kind of escaping that and just kind of moving on with his life. He is sensitive, he is insecure, he is everything that Julian is not. Now he meets Julian at university and he is this top dog, so confident guy who Paul just kind of wants to be. So they kind of connect and are friends or friendly towards each other, and then that's kind of where things start going wrong. So Julian has very high expectations, and he has high expectations of Paul, and Paul kind of realizes that he's never going to live up to these expectations, and you kind of learn the lengths that they will each go to kind of prove themselves to one another. And it's kind of scary because certain things happen and you just, I mean, these are teenagers, they are at university, they are just kids, and the things that happen is just, it's terrifying because you can relate so much, because the fact that things like this can happen. So definitely go into this with a bit of thought. There is some trigger warnings. It is very dark as well, so just be warned for that. But it is a beautiful, beautiful story. Like I said, I did listen to this as an audiobook, and I do kind of want to sit and read this physically, just because I bet I would take more of the story in, because obviously while I was listening to it, I was driving, I was doing other things, so my mind tends to wander a little bit. But if you want a good dark academia book that is just moving and haunting at the same time, I would definitely pick this up. After that, I finally decided to pick up Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. I have had this in my possession for so long and I never got around to it, so I decided to pick it up in February, and I had such a fun time. Now, I do prefer the first book. I think that's just because I read it and it was just so different to the other fantasy books that I've read. This kind of just didn't live up to the hype for me personally. Now, I know other people have read it and absolutely loved it, and I'm not saying that I didn't love it. I just preferred the first one. So Emily Wilde is a scholar, and she kind of specialises in fairy and fairy folk, but she kind of wants to explore more, and she wants to explore other lands and other creatures and things like that. I suppose just to broaden her horizons, I suppose. So she goes off to explore the other land with her fellow scholar Bumblebee, and obviously there is a love interest there. They just have very cute moments, which is just adorable, and they go off exploring and they basically get the chance to kind of figure out where Bumblebee is from, and they can try and figure out the key to kind of release him from his dark past, because his family have some like massive dark plans for him and he doesn't want to be a part of that, but because it's his family kind of controlling him, it's all very confusing. So they basically work together to free him, as well as interacting with all these different fairy folk and magical creatures. And like I said, it is just a fun time. It is a very quick, cozy read, and we found out at the end of this that there is going to be another Emily Wilde book, so their story is going to continue. So if you do like this, then obviously keep an eye out, because a third book is in the work. But I am glad I got around to this. I think the cover is absolutely stunning. I love the mushrooms. I love the green colour on it. It is just such a autumnal cozy read. So I probably read it at the wrong time of year, but I'm okay with that. I'm just glad I finally got around to it. So that was the 6th book I managed to read in February. And now the 7th book, which is probably the best book I have read all year so far, is The Crimson Moth. Now, I devoured this. If you watched my weekly vlog, you will see me talking about this, and if you haven't, I will just link it above. But we basically follow a witch and a witch hunter. So the witches are being purged because basically the humans don't like it. They have these magical abilities. Of course, they are witches, so they have witch hunters who are hunting them down and purging them and bleeding them dry of their blood, and then basically tossing them aside because they don't like witches in their world. So our main character, Rune, she is a witch, but she is also known as the Crimson Moth. So she basically goes around to try and free these witches from the witch hunters. So she goes and takes them out of prison and tries to give them a new life, so they're not going to be purged. They're not going to die, basically. Now, the other person we are following is Gideon, and Gideon is a witch hunter. He is the best of the best witch hunter around, and he ends up capturing a witch called Seraphine, and Seraphine is the person that Rune's nan basically said to save on her deathbed. Seraphine needs to be alive. Now, because Rune is the Crimson Moth, she doesn't understand how Gideon has managed to capture Seraphine without her knowing, so she kind of needs to work with him to kind of get information from him so she can free Seraphine. But then Gideon gets some information that Rune is working with the Crimson Moth, or knows of the Crimson Moth, or could potentially be the Crimson Moth. But Gideon doesn't believe that, because he thinks she's just this rich socialite sort of person who just goes to parties and drinks and is dumb. So she needs something from him, he needs something from her, so they need to work together basically, so he can get information from her and she can get information from him. And obviously a love starts to blossom and bloom, and it is just beautiful, and I just ate this up. This is one of the best books I have read this year. It is such a great romantasy read, and I am telling everyone about it. I have put it down so we have more books coming in at work, because I'm just going to be selling this to everyone. It is just a great fantasy romance read. This is the proof cover as well, and the hardback cover is just absolutely stunning. I know Fairy Loot did a special edition of it as well, which is just gorgeous. I'd love to get my hands on that, but people are selling it for like £50-60 for a book, which is just ridiculous and we are getting off the topic, but this is the best book that I have read so far this year. It's just incredible. It is top tier. If you're going to read any book this year, it needs to be this one. Now, the next book I read was another book that I read for Tandem Collective as a read along, and it is Dearest Intimate. Now, I have had a fun time reading this, but I just know this book was not for me. There was some touching topics and it all just got a bit confusing, and it was really sad, and it just kind of put me in a bit of a slump. I just kind of didn't want to pick this up, and I kind of only did just because we had allocated pages to read every day. So I did end up finishing this, but this book just was not for me. It was a translated fiction, and I love a translated fiction, but there were so many dark topics and things just weren't getting better. So we are following two people. We are following a granddaughter and we are following a grandmother. Now, the granddaughter is in our time as it is, and she found some letters that her grandmother had wrote. It chops and changes throughout the book to whether she's reading the letters that her grandmother has wrote, and it goes back like in time as such to the things that are happening with her, and then it goes back to just with the granddaughter and her time. So the grandmother is a cross-dressing actress and the granddaughter is in a very abusive marriage. So we are kind of following them each at their own times, but it is such a difficult kind of novel to get into, and I just, like I said, wasn't reaching to pick it up. So it probably wasn't the best book I read this month. But I mean, we got through it, and I am grateful for the read along because it did push me to read it and finish it, but that's all I've really got to say. And then the last book I read in the month of February is The Adventures of Amina El-Sarafi. Now, I really did enjoy this story. She is a pirate and she's basically on her last quest to find this missing person and be given a lot of money, basically. So Amina is a well-known pirate. She is, again, the best of the best sort of pirate around. She is good at finding things. So this old lady comes by and says, I need you to find my granddaughter. She's gone missing. She's been stolen. Now, little do we actually know that she's actually ran away because she is betrothed to be married, and she doesn't want that for herself. She doesn't see herself as a wife. She sees herself as a male and wants to cut her hair and kind of live as a male, and there's nothing wrong with that. But obviously her family don't know that side of her. They just want her to marry wealthy and be protected. So Amina says yes, because basically the grandmother is threatening her own daughter that if you do not find my granddaughter, I'm going to kill your daughter. So she reluctantly takes it. She finds her crew and goes off on this adventure. We meet Amina's husband, who is not human and is this weird mix of sea life, animal, creature thing. She basically calls him a demon. He doesn't really have a name for what he is, but he's just not human. That's all you need to know. But she doesn't want to work with him, but he kind of knows stuff that she doesn't, so they do end up working together, and they do kind of rekindle their bond a little bit, even though the last time they met she did like throw him at the bottom of the sea, but we don't need to talk about that. So they just go on this quest to find the missing daughter, and it's told in a story. So this has already happened, and this is Amina telling us and telling like her daughter the story of what happened. And from what I know, this is going to be a trilogy, and at the end of this they're all sat down and her daughter wants another story, and she is just happy to kind of give that to her, but it says that's a story for another time. So it looks like the next book is just going to be another adventure, another story that Amina goes on. And I suppose whether it will kind of link to this story, I'm not too sure. Whether you have to read them in order, again, I don't really know, but it does sound very intriguing, because a lot of books, especially in trilogies, they always end on this big cliffhanger and you just kind of have to wait around for the next one, whereas this hasn't happened for that, and it's quite a nice sort of ending. You kind of get all your questions answered, and then knowing that there is another book, I'm very intrigued by that, and I will probably pick it up. So I listened to this as well as physically read it. I kind of did both, and I really enjoyed that. I did enjoy the audiobook. If you're going to pick up an audiobook, I would recommend this, just because I thought the narrator was really good. I'm glad I ended the month on a high with finishing off with this, and this book is actually the fantasy book for the month of March at Waterstone, so I definitely wanted to read this so I had a bit more knowledge to be able to sell the book to people. And it is a book that I'm just genuinely going to recommend anyway, because it was just a fun read. So I'm not the biggest like nautical sort of retelling person, but I did really enjoy this. So again, I'm glad I picked it up, and I'm glad I ended on a high. So these are all the books that I managed to read in the month of February. Please let me know which books you managed to read, which one was your favourite, which one wasn't your favourite and why. I'd love to know. If you have any recommendations on books for me to read, again, I would love that, because I'm happy to try and read any book you kind of recommend to me. I am trying to get out of my reading genre a bit more and read more different books other than just fantasy. But thank you so much for listening to me ramble on about these amazing books. I had such a fun reading month, and hopefully I will be able to read a bit more in March. I do weekly reading vlogs, so if you do want any more in-depth thoughts about the books I read, you can check those videos out, because I do try to go into a bit more depth about the books and what's going on. But thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, then don't forget to like and comment, and please subscribe to my channel. Any little thing like that really just means the world to me. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.